Good morning. Welcome to the Eastman Financial Report. I'm Dan Eastman, your host, and today is Thursday, February 5th, 2026. Thank you so much for tuning in. As always, we appreciate your viewership here at the Eastman Financial Report and throughout the day on all of the great programming you see on worldviewtube.com and, of course, here at Worldview Radio. As you know, we're a Christian broadcasting network, and we've been in this space since 2006, bringing into that great marketplace of ideas all of the news and information of the day from a Christian perspective. That's our ministry, our mission, our passion, our goal, our effort. This is what we do every day. And we're very happy to be able to do this as that great marketplace of ideas ever expands. It's a very dynamic place, and there are entrances and people entering this marketplace, more and more voices every day, more and more information every day. And that's why it's important that the Christian perspective stay front and center. And that's what we do here every day of the week in our broadcasting message, our content, and our willingness to share the gospel worldwide through this media and this platform. So if you'd like to help us in that effort, you can do that by going to worldviewfoundation.com and making a donation. As you know, we're viewer supported and very much appreciative of all donations that help us continue to keep this ministry alive and also broadcasting free of charge. You notice you're not paying a paywall or a subscription fee to watch this content. And that's because this is our ministry, and you can help us continue to do that by making a donation. You can go to worldviewfoundation.com or wvwfoundation.com. It's on the bottom of the screen. Or you can use the QR code, and it'll take you right to the website, and you can sign up for a one-time donation, or you can sign up for monthly donations. And that has the added economic benefit of helping us flatten our revenue curve so we can better match our costs to our revenue and keep our content free of charge. So it's really appreciated. And when you make a donation to us, you are assured that we are here broadcasting our message on a daily basis. You can also help us by doing business with the vendors you see advertising throughout the day on our network. We don't sell blocks of advertising time. Rather, we partner with companies that we know and trust. So when you do business with them, rest assured you're doing business with a quality company, and a small portion of the proceeds comes back to us in the form of a commission, and that also helps us in our ministry. And we appreciate that, and so will you doing business with these fine vendors, and the vendors will appreciate it as well. There's a third way you can support our ministry, and that, of course, is by going to worldviewtube.com/vault. It's a subscription service that we've come up with. There's a little paywall, but when you subscribe to the Vault, you are not only helping this ministry continue in its efforts of keeping a Christian-centered perspective in the great marketplace of ideas, but you're also deriving a benefit. Brandon Howes has been doing his ministry since 2006. He's written 15 books. He has had events and conferences and seminars, and all of that has been digitally recorded, and all of that digital data now lives in the Vault. So if you're looking for a place, a single source of spiritually enhanced material that can be of very great value to you as you go through your faith efforts and your faith struggles through life, having a subscription to the Vault is a wonderful tool to have because it's an on-demand feature. You can go in, log in, and you can watch conferences and wonderful sermons and wonderful presentations. All of that information is there available right at your fingertips. So if you're having a little rough journey in your spiritual life right now, subscribing to the Vault is not a bad idea. So something of great value to you, then of course it helps the network as well. But also think of this: we not only ourselves need to brush up from time to time, but we all know people who are struggling in life, and unfortunately, the struggles of the day and these days, being a very complex world in which we live, what do you do to help somebody who's struggling in their faith or struggling in life? Maybe a gift subscription to the Vault makes a lot of sense right now because that's something that they can log into in a dark moment, and they will find really, really great spiritually uplifting content. So you can help yourself, but you can also help others that you know and love who are looking for some spiritual enhancement, and that's what the Vault will bring. So it's a wonderful idea. You don't have to wait till the holidays to make a gift of it. Giving somebody you know who's struggling access to the Vault may be a very, very important thing for them. So anyway, those are the three ways you can help us out. You can make a donation, you can do business with the companies advertising on our network, and you can subscribe to the Vault, which is a wonderful, wonderful treasure. And of course, if you're interested in my work here on this network, the reruns to the Eastman Financial Report are also stored in the vault. So if you'd like to see what I'm saying and criticize my work, have at it. And please subscribe to the vault, pay the fee, and you can review my work. And then you can come on the show and we can debate, because we all know, all of us in this space, that the economics is considered the dismal science. And it's dismal for a reason. There's a lot of debate as to how the economy works and how it should work and what we can do to make it work better. That's all debatable, and it's been debatable for at least 2,500 years, since the ancient Greeks came up with economos, or the word that describes how people manage their household budgets. We're still, to this day, trying to figure out how to make the economy work and what can we do to interfere with Adam Smith's purity of supply and demand and a free market. And that's what this science is all about. So if you'd like to debate, you come on the show and we'll have a robust discussion. Well, let's jump into the news. And of course, today is Thursday. And traditionally, that's the day I report on the unemployment numbers, because the Bureau of Labor Statistics publishes forth the unemployment claims from the prior week each Thursday. So this Thursday, we are looking at prior claims for unemployment were people who filed last week throughout the United States. And we like to look at that number because it's an important metric in deciding where the economy is going. That's what I was talking about just a minute ago. This is a science. It's a social science. It's not a quantitative exercise. So what we do is we look at data points over time. That's what the world of economics is all about. We track data over time, and then if I bring up my graph here, we create a curve. And of course, if the slope is positive, like is the economy growing? Well, that's a good thing. If the slope is negative, the economy is declining. That's a bad thing. And what we try to do is measure the various touch points within the macro economy, the national economy, and so that we can determine the trajectory. Are things getting better, or are things getting worse? Now, when you're on Wall Street and you're a financial analyst, you're looking at a much more refined and detailed level of economics, because you're trying to decide if a certain investment is going to go up in value or down in value. So it tends to be a more myopic look from the finance perspective. And it's very important that they do that, because the whole purpose of having a finance degree and an accounting degree, or being on Wall Street, whatever that is to buy low and sell high. And that's the model. So you use economic tools and financial tools, statistical tools, mathematical tools to try and calculate as best you can a probability as to whether a specific investment is going to go up or it's going to go down. And of course, if you listen to Warren Buffett, who's one of the greatest investment minds to ever live in modern society, he will point out that there is a qualitative side to investment, and then there is a quantitative side. And when you try to use the quantitative model, the mathematical models, as your only predictor of whether the markets are going up or the markets are going down, you run into some very difficult headwinds, because markets are based upon human nature and human interaction. Basically, greed and fear, two primary motivators of a market, and those are human emotional reactions. And you're trying to plot the direction of markets using mathematics. Now, mathematics has become very sophisticated, especially with the ability to use powerful analytical tools in analyzing different trends and inputs and outputs. But at the end of the day, there are two components to any type of financial analysis. There's the emotional, and then there's the quantitative. So it's qualitative for qualities and quantitative for quantities. And effectively, the better you are at synergizing those two mathematical and emotional paths, the more accurate you're going to be in your investing. That's why Warren Buffett is such a phenomenon, and his team and others. There are great financial minds, but what you will find is that the great financial minds look not only to the math, but also to the human and emotional components of investing. And by using math and propping up the emotional, they have a pretty good sense of where the market's going, and that's why they tend to do better in the market. So that's why when we talk about statistics in economics, it's important, and that's why we look at the labor statistics as one of those components. Because what we're trying to do is figure out, are people in the United States gainfully employed? Are they working? And that's a big part of government policy. Federal government, in theory, which is in my deteriorating opinion of the federal government, originally, back in the day, the idea was that maybe the federal government, being a macro government, it's the government of the whole country rather than the individual states, could have some impact in stimulating the whole economy. Well, it's not worked out that way, of course. And as we look at the various and sundry economic disciplines that have paraded themselves through Washington over the period of years, starting with Adam Smith, and then, of course, the Marxists have always been there, and the monetary theorists, and the hard money crowd is there, and the Keynesians, of course, they're all in there trying to persuade policymakers, do this, it's better for the national economy. No, do this, it's better for the national economy. And these philosophies clash. If you look at pure Adam Smith, free markets, and you look at Marxism, they're diametrically opposed. If you look at Keynesianism, John Maynard Keynes' attempt at this, it was to how do you fit Marxism into a free market model and make sense of it? Well, that basically bankrupted the country, $38.5 trillion in debt and counting, deficits of annual deficits of $2.5 trillion as far as the eye can see and as far as the mind can imagine. And so that hasn't worked either. Then the hard money comes along and you say, well, we should go back to the gold standard, you see, or the silver standard. And that was the big battle of Williams Jennings Bryant back in the late 1800s into the early 1900s. So we've been debating economic platform, economic modeling for a very, very long time. And of course, this goes back long before there was the United States, long before 1776. There were people and powerful governments in Europe that were wrestling with the same thing. The French were very dominant in early economic thought. That didn't work out real well for the French. Of course, you had the South Sea bubble, and of course, the Dutch with the tulip bulb explosion. People have been wrestling with this for a very long time, and it has to do with money and power and the ability of a country to be prosperous and more powerful than neighbors. That's why Adam Smith, in his seminal work, is called The Wealth of Nations. And his original idea was to think about how is it that some nations are better off than others, and why is it that some people in England are better off than others, coming to the conclusion that there's a supply and a demand, and when those two forces interact and they come to a point of touching, when supply equals demand, a market is in equilibrium. That means at a certain point, at a quantity demanded, there will be a price at a quantity demanded. That's an equilibrium price. Well, that theory still holds today, and we try to poke holes through it in all different ways and all different ways. But at the end of the day, it appears that Adam Smith got it right, and he was the one to notice that there's a nexus between mathematical formulas and human behavior, and you cannot separate human behavior and emotional thinking from economics, because people make decisions emotionally. If you go out to buy a new car, there's a component of emotion. You don't just look at a number and check a box and then some car or another shows up in your driveway. We don't buy cars on data. You want, how do I look driving this thing? Do I look cool? You look cool. That's the emotional component. And the same thing with colors. When you buy a red car versus a black car, a silver car, or a blue car, or a gray or green or whatever. And it's all about this concept of emotion. And that's how the fashion industry and the fashions of the day, the du jour, the fashions, the a la mode, people will tend to migrate toward a popular look. So you see this quite often in fashion. Fashion trends come and everybody's wearing the same thing, and then next trend comes, everybody's wearing the same thing. That's the emotional component of economics, and I think that's why it's important to think about when we try to predict the direction of the economy and make public policy based upon these predictions. And that's been sort of a raging debate since the 1970s. Back in the day when I was in graduate school in the 80s, there was an emergence of econometric analysis because of the emergence of PCs and Excel spreadsheet, the electronic spreadsheets, and the democratization of computing power that put very important computing power in the hands of people who thought like this. And there was a real movement toward we don't have to think about emotions anymore. We can look at mathematics and numbers, and we will project and predict the outcome of the economy, and we don't care what people's emotions are. Well, we've had many, many decades of experience in that. And what we find is that emotions are very much alive and well in the markets. And those who look at numbers alone tend to get to crash and burn. And of course, those who look at emotions alone, the same thing. And we saw that most recently in the run up in gold and silver prices. And it's, it goes back to the old saying, which is non-quantitative, but what motivates a market, an Adam Smithian market, a supply of something and a demand for something? Well, the two human emotions, classic Wall Street smart aleck line, is it's greed and fear. When people see a market going up, they jump on because they don't want to miss the ride up. It's greed. Boy, I want my share of that market up, and up went gold. It went up from, I think when I started the show, it was $1,806 an ounce on my very first voyage here, coming up on 3 years in March. Boy, we're about a month away. And gold today, I looked at it, it's still about $4,500. It went over $5,000. So how does gold go from $1,800 to $5,000? Well, there's a lot of people thinking it's going up, and everybody wants to buy in because they don't want to miss the run. And that's the greed component that runs the value of a commodity to a point. And then, of course, another classic Wall Street saying is trees don't grow to the sky. At some point, there's a treetop. And when you reach the treetop, then things slide back. And then why do they slide back? And why did we see such a tremendous collapse in gold and silver prices? I mean, this was going parabolic, and everybody was convinced the world was coming to an end. So you can imagine an army of people racing out to their coin shops or their gold and silver dealers and buying whatever thing had gold or silver in it, because they didn't want to miss the run up. Because of course, gold is not going to stop at 5,000. It'll go to 10,000. It'll go to 20,000. And the more you believe this, that's the greed component. The greediest of the greedy drive the price to the top, until all of a sudden, it's like musical chairs. The music stops, and everybody looks around and realizes there are more people up there than there are chairs. And then, of course, the fear kicks in. First, greed runs it up, and then fear happens. Well, you don't want to be the guy that paid $5,000, and then it goes down to $2,000, and you lose $3,000 an ounce. You don't want to be that person, because you're going to have to explain it to your friends and relatives, some of whom will be a little more miffed at you than others. But the point is, you want to get out fast. You want to grab and get out. And of course, then the fear component kicks in. The market for that commodity collapses. So what we see is that greed pushes the price past where the numbers would say. The numbers will say, this is, gold should be what? I'll pull this out of the air, $4,800 an ounce. Well, it took it to 52, 51. Okay. That's the greed component. And then the panic sets in, the fear, and it pushes it below where you'd like to see it. Now, today it's 48.98. But the point is, there are whiplashes at the peaks and the valleys. And that's the emotional component. That's the fear and the greed kicking in. So you have to be aware of that. And that's why I don't give investment advice. I never tell you you better buy this or you better sell that. I don't do that. The idea is that you want to think about, how do these markets work and why do they work? And that's exactly how they do work. And that's why you want to pay attention when you're investing in anything. You don't want to be the last person in or the last person out. Okay, I have to take a break here. I'll be right back, and we'll talk about some unemployment news and other interesting news today. Be right back. Thanks.
Hello, I'm Brandon House. Would you like to gain access to over 20 years of my radio shows, TV shows, my books? I've written 15 books, and most of those books are ebooks now. And we have conference DVDs, conferences where we filmed our conferences at the Ozarks, literally starting 20 years ago. It's all available in our archived vault. All you have to do is go to worldviewtube.com/vault, worldviewtube.com/vault, and for a reasonable monthly fee, you gain access to over 20 years of Christian worldview programming, news, information, books, documentaries, and a powerful search engine. And folks, it's a great way not only to educate yourself, equip yourself, but it's a big way that you can help fund our continuation as a broadcast network. Please check it out. worldviewtube.com/vault, worldviewtube.com/vault, and help us continue pushing out a Christian worldview.
Okay, so I'm back. So I want to tie this into the unemployment numbers. That's how I started. But we have Thursday unemployment numbers that show who applied for unemployment last week, and that's nationwide. And that number was 231,000 people who signed up for unemployment at their state agencies. These are state-run programs, but the Bureau of Labor Statistics gathers all of this data and publishes it as a macro number so that economists and financial people can have a sense. And keep in mind, this is one data point on a continuing line. So we're looking for a curve or a slope here. And we see that that's up from 209,000 the week before. So there's a slight increase. But if we look at that number from at least from the time the Eastman Financial Report went live in March of 2023, what you realize is that's been a very flat number. We have been plotting. And of course, what you're seeing is you're not seeing a real boost in unemployment. You're not seeing a softening. You're seeing a very flat line at about the 200 to 250,000 people range each week file for unemployment. And that is, in the minds of all labor economists of any note, a very low number when you have 330 million Americans. Only 230 to 250 to 200,000 each week are applying for unemployment. It's not something to be concerned about. So what this tells us from an unemployment perspective for those people who are unemployed and need to find the social safety net, which is what the unemployment programs are, we're not seeing a dramatic increase. We're not seeing a dramatic decrease, even during the Biden years, which were numbers that were very mysterious. But we're not seeing a real push in unemployment. So what that tells you is people filing for unemployment is not that big of a deal. Now, keep in mind and keep in your prayers the 231,000 people who did apply, because obviously they need help, and it's not a good position to be in. But what it's telling us from a statistical perspective is that unemployment claims aren't that big of a deal. So that's why over a 3-year period, we don't see a real turbulence in unemployment in the United States. If you look at the unemployment number at about 4.4% of us are considered to be unemployed. That is below the Federal Reserve's 5% employment number, which is considered to be full employment. So the U.S. economy is in full employment at this point in time, and you're not seeing any weekly trend that suggests that perhaps that's changing anytime soon. Now, when we compare that to the JOLTS number, which is the job openings number that the federal government puts out, and this was the number that was really wonky under President Biden. They were creating all sorts of jobs, like 1 million jobs that never existed. But what's happened is we're bringing this number back into control. And the number reported this week is 6.5 million job openings across the United States right now. 6.5 million job openings. Well, that's great. You get 231,000 people that are applying for unemployment nationwide. They should find the 6.5 million jobs and take those jobs, and it'll solve the problem. The current unemployment benefit recipients. There's two components that I should have mentioned. The first is the weekly unemployment claims for last week. The second is continuing, and that's 1.8 million. So 1.8 million people are on unemployment. Every week people sign up, and every week people drop off the back end or they find jobs. So you have 1.8 million people who are unemployed, but you have 6.5 million job openings. Now, if you think, well, why don't we take the 1.8, put them in the 6.5, and then everybody be working? Well, of course, we all know. I mean, the job opening you need may be 2 states away, and you're not willing to move or whatever. So the point is, we're looking at the JOLTS numbers, and that number at 6.5 million job openings, is down rather dramatically from December, which was at 7.1. So what we're seeing is fewer job openings in the economy, and that would be a cause for concern for economists or financial analysts. You say, we're not seeing an increase in unemployment claims for unemployment compensation, but what we are seeing is fewer job openings. Now, mind you, if you go from 7.1 million to 6.5 million, that's still like 3 times as many jobs as you have unemployment, people on unemployment. but not everybody who's unemployed files for unemployment. But it still shows an equilibrium on a national level. And that's one of the problems we have in the United States with macroeconomics in general, because from an macroeconomic perspective, this makes sense. So you get, 2.8 million unemployed and you get 6 million job openings, put them to work. But it's more complicated than that. And that's why when we look at the United States as a macroeconomy, it's more complicated than the headline numbers will tell in all instances, whether it be labor or whether it be housing sales. Housing is very local business. And when you look at the median price of housing in the United States, like existing houses right now, $436,000 median price for an existing house. Well, if you're living on Long Island, you're not going to find a house for 436,000. Or if you're living on Maui, you're just not. But if you're living in Iowa somewhere, you most likely will find something even less. You'll be getting yourself a bargain. But the point is, that's the problem we have with the macro economy, and that's why it's very important when you watch financial news and you listen to financial headlines, read the headlines, you have to run that through the filter. And that's part of the Eastman Financial Report's mission here, is the critical thinking filter, to not just take these numbers and believe them, because they may be true mathematically and they may be suggestive, but what they're not showing is this type of economic chaos that people in the media because gloom sells. I mean, if you're going to be successful in financial media, all you have to do is get on and tell everybody how terrible it is all the time. And that's a popular thing because people like gloom and doom, and that's traditionally how it works. It's not really exciting to be talking about how good things are, because people in the good times don't tend to listen to financial news. So anyway, it's an important component, but we're talking labor economics today, and that's why when you think about it from Washington's perspective, and this is very relevant with respect to the Federal Reserve. And that's when the Federal Reserve has 12 regions around the United States, because it's not one number. If they were based in New York with the Federal Reserve in New York, they'd have no clue what was going on in Texas or San Francisco or Minnesota or Chicago or where St. Louis, where all the feds are. The point is, we have data collection from across the country, and what you realize is that different regions will have different economic excitement at any given point in time. Sometimes it might be more manufacturing heavy, and if manufacturing is doing well, that region's doing well. Others are agricultural, and agricultural markets are different than manufacturing markets. So you have to be very careful in looking at the headlines and not just taking the headline and then turning it into a political decision, because you have to think past the headlines to understand the economics. And that's why, I mentioned I spend a lot of time on X, engaging back and forth with other economic thinkers. And one of the things we were marveling at yesterday was the lack of mathematical skills by some of the people griping about the housing market. This concept of interest. If you take Finance 101 or maybe even Accounting 101, you learn how money works at a very fundamental level. And if you don't take those courses, because they tend to be quantitative courses, you may not quite grasp the nuances of an amortized mortgage. And that's another good reason to not only watch this program, but do a little homework in finance. But nevertheless, what it tells you is that there's still a bifurcation in the American society. And that's what Washington has to react to, not only at the Federal Reserve, where they're trying to keep interest rates at a moderate level to stimulate the economy, but also our beloved Congress, which inevitably will take these headlines and these stories because they're created to drive political momentum. And Congress survives on re-elections and political momentum. And the idea is they will tend to pass things that they can pass in the interests of the special interests promoting them, to the point where it becomes a political liability. And that's the one metric, or the one mechanism that congressional representatives and senators have, is how much can I vote for and get through for the special interests before the people back home react. And that's always the metric in their minds, is how far can I go? I mean, I would vote, these people give me huge political donations, and I can become, worth, I go into Congress at 700,000 net worth, and I come out 30,000 or 30 million net worth 4 years later. That doesn't happen accidentally. So the question is, how do you keep that money machine going and at the same time measure the folks back home? And that's where we have to change our paradigm in the United States, because the message from the folks back home has been lethargic at best for decades. But we have to begin to understand that in Washington, all spending happens, programs happen through Congress. The president can recommend, hey, we need a department or whatever, like Space Force, whatever, make that up. But it's Congress that puts the money to the program. And first of all, adopts the program, creates the agency, and then funds the agency. And that's where the rubber meets the road. And that's why, from a political perspective, we have to be ever vigilant of a Congress that simply cannot balance its budget. 38.5 trillion in debt. That's a bad track record. 2 trillion plus in deficit every year. That's a bad track record. We can't let them do this without constant vigilance. Okay, well, that's what I've got for Labor today. I'll be back tomorrow with more news. Thanks so much for tuning in, and really go to worldviewfoundation.com and help us out, make a donation. Talk to you tomorrow. Bye.